Hello! Welcome to Why Not Both? My name is Pam Schaefer, and I'm a musician and therapist in Los Angeles. Why Not Both is all about how our multiple passions inform our identity, and this season we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine and produced by Laura Studeris. If you like what you hear, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform and come spend time with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, and that is both on Instagram and on Twitter. We were thrilled to spend some time with Ioanna Gika, and I hope that you enjoy our interview. Welcome to Why Not Both? It's funny, I think I saw you open for Garbage.
Ah, yes. Shirley Manson, the legend.
It was.
Was it in April was it like around this time last year?
I have a very abstract sense of time. And so I'm like, that's entirely possible.
I'm the same way. Well, then you and I subscribe to the whole time is a human construct thing.
Yes. I feel like I was like, okay, I know where it was. It was at the theater that's connected to USC downtown. It's beautiful.
The Shrine?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So was that of spring of last year? Was that last year?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think it was. Because then in the fall, I opened for Chelsea Wolfe. So yeah, that would have been the spring or early summer, spring.
I remember it was warm, and I was excited that I finally went to the theater by USC because my several of my family members went to USC, but I did not, and I've always found that area and the campus really beautiful. And
How cool to be able to visit where your family has studied. That's cool.
And I just thought, I finally get to see a concert here, and it was excellent. And I remembered you because I was trying to look you up on my phone to figure out who you were, but there was no reception. And then I thought to myself, why not just enjoy what's happening, Pam?
Oh, well, I'm very touched that you had that reaction. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, I appreciate what you do, and it's exciting to get to interview you. Like the whole podcast is about pretty much all the other things aside from music that inform your passion in life. And so after looking you up and seeing, once I was out of the Shrine Auditorium, I got to see all the other things that you were passionate about, and I was like, ooh, I want to talk to her.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it.
How have you been, and what have you been up to?
Well, is this the beginning, or are we just chatting? I don't know how these work.
It's so funny. I used to have like a really structured, like, what's the first thing that you do? And what are the other things that you do? And how do you balance your passions in life? And now I'm like, do we have a structure? Do we know what's going on? No. It's a strange new world. So I kind of tend to freeform it.
That is interesting. I find it interesting that you are letting go of structure in a time that feels so untethered and amniotic. Instead of clinging to structure, you are disassembling it. What would be the ways that you would usually start prior to this?
My favorite question earlier was, what do you do, and what's a better question to ask?
Ooh, I love that you added the second part to that question. Well, that's it's interesting. The phrase "what do you do" is a question that has always felt truncated to me, as if it is the genesis of an ad lib, and yet the exchange of question and answer are at its core an accepted assumption of what I view as one born of a capitalist society, meaning what do you do ... for money, or define your productivity in relation to society. And the expectation of giving and assuming an answer guided by capitalism can create a discomfort, as it feels like the exchange is marionetted. I don't think that's a word. Conducted by an invisible dictator. So I like that you add that second part of the question, because I always seek to unleash myself from those invisible strings.
Yes.
Because what do you do? What do you do in an earthquake? Well, my answer, do you know what I mean? Like, what do you do in an earthquake?
Well, it depends on how big it is. As an LA native, first off, if it's in the middle of the night, I sit bolt upright. That's my first move. I've never been able to just kind of chill. And then I try and determine how big it is and how long it's going for, because then it's either try and get to part of a stable frame of the house, or if it's too big, which has happened a few times, it's either to curl into a ball with my arms and a blanket over my face so that I don't get beamed by things, or to roll, if I'm on a bed, to roll to the side of the bed to create kind of like an A-frame if something falls so that you're protected underneath it.
Gosh, that's a much better strategy than what I do. I sort of like
earthquakes.
I like look to see if there's a hint of a sway from my chandelier, and if there is, I go on Twitter for confirmation that there is in fact an earthquake happening. And then I think random thoughts like, I'm so happy I wasn't getting LASIK at this moment, or like, but actually taking measures to preserve your life it's just a way better move.
Well, the Twitter game afterwards is really fun. Like, I've got to say, the Twitter and the group threads after, when everyone's guessing how big it is, and like, like talking about what fell, what will rebuild, like,
yeah,
that's the fun game after. I think I was just trained by my parents from a very early age of just like, I don't know. I mean, where did you grow up?
I was born in the United States. To a Greek immigrant scientist father, and a Greek mother. And so I was raised primarily in the US, but we would live for a few months in the summer each year in Greece to spend time with my grandparents and uncle and extended family. And then my family, I mean, it's difficult to answer this question without sort of giving the whole map, because my parents divorced, and my mom remarried another Greek.
Wow.
And their life brought them to Southeast Asia.
Wow.
Primarily posted in Jakarta. So I was going back and forth for a time to my home with them there. And then my father moved to Sweden. And so then my mom moved to Australia, and now she's back in Greece, and I'm in LA. So it's kind of
my goodness,
all over the place. But you grew up in LA.
Yeah. I was
and
like,
so do you, having grown up in a place where there's earthquakes and fires, and what is your relationship with disaster?
Tacit familiarity. And then my brain flipped over to what you were speaking of before. Of, by the way, I love the phrase, like the turn of phrase marionetted. I want to use that in the future. I think that it's brilliant. And I was thinking about what you were talking about with the like the disaster of capitalism, and I was thinking about like what it did to the Greek economy. And I was thinking, well, that's a whole other disaster one has to prepare for.
Yes, I have a cornucopia of tragedies I can share with you. But to go to the word marionetted, or marionette rather, because I'm not even sure marionetted is a word, although I like it as a concept. But the word marionette, I believe, comes from the French, because the first marionette was the Virgin Mary, I believe.
Really?
Yeah, and I think that's where the word marionette comes from.
Huh. Whoa. So was she then controlled by the strings, like held by God, or would it?
Right? It feels like a sinister metaphor.
Whoa.
Yeah, I don't know if it was to teach children in Bible school or what, but I recall that being the origin of that word.
Oh my goodness. I'll have to, oh my God. Now I want to go down like an internet wormhole of looking that up. That's fascinating. I guess having been raised, I guess I call myself like an expired Jew. I was raised Reformed Jewish, but like don't practice religion, but raised in that culture. Whenever I learn about, I'm fascinated by Christian culture and by Catholic culture, and just like all the things that I wasn't raised in, but are part of like Western religious tradition. I'm really interested in just because I find them fascinating.
Is there a particular point of entrance that is fascinating for you?
I find ritual fascinating, and I find the splits of the Marys fascinating, like the Virgin Mary and then Mary Magdalene, like that duality. I think that's so interesting. And then that there's the other split of like Father, Son, Holy Ghost, but same thing, like kind
Right.
of like
Combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. My religion is combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. Same thing.
Same thing, totally the same thing. Why can't you accept this is the same thing? This dichotomy makes total sense. And you're like, wait, what? I find it so fascinating. Yeah, the dichotomies, I guess it's also related to the interest in psychology of like the parts of ourselves that we aren't quite sure how to integrate, so it becomes a Pizza Hut Taco Bell.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
slam them together.
Like what, when you were younger and you did go there for the summers, like what, I guess, how did that inform kind of how you view yourself and what comes out of your work?
I have, as an only child, I spent a lot of time alone and had parents that worked full time. So when we would be in Greece for, months at a time, living all together with my grandparents in their like tiny apartment in Athens, and then going to the islands, it was a much different experience to my life in the United States. And so I've always felt a little bit like an oddball. Like when I'm in the United States, I don't feel 100% American. And when I'm in Greece, I feel strangely odd. I think I just always have a bit of an alien feel, but I connect to various places, and and the textures and the sounds and the experiences have shaped and informed my work. So a lot of times it's giving thanks to a place, or examining the place and how it's shaped me, like a funeral in in um, in Los Angeles is different from a funeral in Athens, Greece, which is different from a funeral in Indonesia. And even within all of these places, funerals can be different to one another. So I have seen a lot and been exposed to a lot, and I'm grateful for a lot of experiences. And I think that makes its way into the tapestry of sound that I weave together.
And that's interesting that you chose a funeral as a thing to compare them. Like I was thinking of like ritual and also closure, and also one of the most like, I guess, kind of like the beautiful last gift that you can give to someone. I was like, that's a really fascinating thing to think about in the context of different cultures.
I've had just so many family members pass away, and I don't want to steer this in too dark of a direction, but my father passed away, my stepfather passed away, my uncle, my cousin, 4 grandparents, kind of all in a short amount of time, just over the course of kind of a few years. And so maybe that's why I jumped to the flagpole of funeral around which to create this maypole.
I mean, that makes sense. I'm sorry, but also that totally makes sense.
But yeah, have you been to any good funerals lately? I don't know.
I mean, strangely enough, when you said that, 2 family members of mine passed away simultaneously on Friday on either side of the family.
Oh
And
gosh, I'm so sorry.
oh, thank you. Yeah, it was, one of them was very expected and the other was not. And it was very strange because I reached out to my favorite cousin on the other side of the family, on my dad's side of the family, to tell him about my aunt who had passed away on my mom's side of the family. And he texted me back almost simultaneously because I had said, hey, I need to talk to you. Can I call you? And he had said, I need to call you. And it was because we were both informing the other of a death in the family.
Oh my goodness.
It was very weird. It was very, very weird. And so he and I have actually been talking every day now, pretty much, which I mean, we talk a lot anyway. We're family, but I don't usually talk to him daily. But he and I attended our first Zoom funeral.
Oh my goodness. What, I mean, I can't even imagine what that must have been like. How did that make you feel?
It was so strange. Like, it was, now I'm curious about funerals in other places, like, because I'd never experienced a funeral like this, where of course, like, you know, in some ways, parts of it were very affecting because when you're witnessing people having an emotional response, at least in me, like I tend to, even if it's distant over the internet, I tend to very deeply empathize. That's why sometimes I don't watch movies and things like that, as if I watch people going through something, I start going through it. And sometimes I'm like, no, thank you, we good now.
Yeah.
And so in some ways it was very affecting, but in other ways it was so absurd, I guess is how I describe it, that it was hard to remember what was happening in the moment. And like at one point the rabbi had his phone on, but it was pointed at the ceiling of the car.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it was like and my cousin texted me saying, it looks like he needs to program his garage door opener.
Oh.
And I just texted him back. I was like, you are not allowed to make me laugh right now.
Well, I think laughter is such it is something that has really helped me through these types of moments. And I just want to first say I'm so sorry about your family members, and also I was going to apologize for I speak about these things kind of colloquially and with humor, because I think that's how I deal with things. I just tend to go to the side of humor, and that's what helps me. But what I've found is how surprising moments of humor can be in at times that are seemingly just purely despondent. Like I remember at my grandmother's funeral, which was a really hard one for me because she lived with us. She helped raise me. And I was in some ways at that time closer with her than I was with my parents. But she died quite suddenly. And at her funeral, I just thought, this is just the worst thing. And at her, it was the wake. We had all gathered, and all of a sudden, all the lights went out.
What?
And there was a gasp, and I was like, oh my God, what is going on? And I looked over, and I think she's like a 90-year-old great aunt of mine had purposefully and mischievously turned off the lights and looked at me and winked. And it made me laugh. And I never in my life thought that I would have laughed at a moment which was so heartbreaking to me. But it's kind of beautiful how we can have these two emotions existing at the same time. And perhaps that's why I oftentimes, like default to humor as a coping mechanism.
I would say humor and intellectualism are my favorite defense mechanisms. So I'm on the same page with this. Where, like I didn't know what to do in that moment. And I feel as though my favorite cousin and your great aunt are on the same page with this one. Where people are like, well, what was that like? And honestly, the most salient moment is, trying not to laugh because like my cousin had his camera off. I texted him back. I was like, you're cheating. You don't have your camera on.
Classic funeral cheating Zoom move.
Exactly. He's like, this feels like Hollywood Squares. I was just like, dude, stop trying to make me laugh.
Hollywood Squares. Your family sounds cool.
We're a bunch of weirdos. It's excellent. Oh my goodness. It kind of brought me back to like Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. And now I'm trying to like squish other weird places in my head, like Baja Fresh Jollibee.
Yeah, or like if we were to start the question, what do you do with what do you do when your dog gets attacked by the spray of a skunk? Well, apparently, if you have tomato paste on hand, you apply it, it masks the odor, and also voila, you have a dog pizza. So there's like a combination also.
Maybe that should be my litmus test. Like that should be my opening question is like, your dog, a skunk. What next?
What Taco Bell Pizza Hut combination can you make out of that?
Because that feeling you were talking about being like kind of like one foot in one place but one foot in another place, which means that in a way you're in neither place. I was thinking about how that would inform what you make, like that kind of like I'm trying to think of it in a non-cliche term, because the thing that came to my head was like fish out of water, but it's like you're in the water, you're just maybe kind of an exotic fish. And I was thinking about I can words. It's good that
I can words. I love that. I'm gonna I can words one day too.
I can words. I was thinking about that aspect of being otherworldly in a way and how that does come across in your music. And I was wondering, do you collaborate with other producers, or are you doing most of the production work on your songs?
So for my album Thalassa, it was my first time taking an executive producer role. So yes, I guided, albeit, in some ways roughly, because it was my first time doing it, and I hope to continue to learn and expand in the area of production. But yeah, some of the songs on there, I produced and engineered on my iPad. There's a song called Messenger, which is purely on my iPad. In some instances, I worked with an engineer. And I do love to collaborate. I'm open to the spirit of collaboration. But I find that I with this album, I wanted to take the sort of captain seat because the messaging was quite personal. And so even with the music video that I have out, I directed that music video and wrote the treatment and made the costumes and did the choreography and makeup and hair and everything, because I felt like it would feel strange to me if someone were to come in and dictate what I'm supposed to do when the messaging was from me. So, and again, it's not a perfect video, but it felt important to me to guide that.
That's fascinating. Like, and that's so interesting that you said it wasn't perfect. And I was just like, well, it sounds like it would be boring if it was perfect. It sounds like it came out the way that you wanted it to. And I was wondering, how did you make costumes and such like that? Like that to me is so interesting when people, like, I definitely try and execute my sonic ideas visually, and sometimes it doesn't translate because that's not necessarily an area that I have as much experience in. And I was wondering, I was like, how did you do that? It's really cool.
I think from growing up in a family that wasn't like super wealthy, when you grow up without certain things, at least for me, I would just learn to make it. If I wanted shorts, and if I didn't have, I wasn't a child that had access to their parents' credit card. So I would just take a pair of jeans and then cut them and maybe get in trouble with my parents. But, but I think that, there's probably some quote out there about how, lacking something can lead to invention. And so I just sort of, look in my closet. I've made capes out of trousers. I've made trousers out of random fabric that I might get in the downtown fabric district. So, yeah, that's when I say it's not perfect. I don't want to assume the role of a costume designer. Certainly, I haven't gone through that training. I'm not as good as a real costume designer, but I may do what I could with the budget of $500, and Yeah, made a goat pan surfing video.
Yeah, that's why I was so impressed. Is I've watched that video and I was just like, you created all that stuff? Because I was like, okay, I could get to maybe cape level. I'm like, I can conceptualize how I'd logically make a cape, and everything else. I'm
Well,
like,
it also it helps to have things laying around the house. I have masks that I have, like, even from Walgreens, because I love the Renaissance Festival, and so I also just have stuff. So, you know, some of it was altering, tailoring.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that, like you said, some of it is born from having to be creative with the resources you have. And in a way, I've always enjoyed that boredom is very useful. That that the idea of, you know, it's funny because anyone who knows me is like, but you're never bored. I was like, yeah, exactly. Because when I do find myself idle, unless I'm daydreaming about something, that's what sparks me to do something, is to be like, okay, well, there's nothing here. What should I fill this with? What do I want to do? And if you don't have that pause, or if you already have like an abundance of things that are already prefabricated, it's like you wouldn't be that motivated to make something else.
I agree. I identify with that strongly. I don't get bored. And again, I think perhaps that's from spending so much time alone. When I was little, boredom was not, I mean, boredom is a luxury in some ways. And that's, growing up, that's not necessarily something I had either. So, like, to keep stimulated, fill your mind. Yeah, I identify with what you're saying.
What were some of the different experiences that you had? Because I've been to Athens as an adult, but I was never there as a child, and I don't have family there. And I'm curious, what was different? Like, what was your experience there as a child as compared to in America as a child?
So like everything. The sounds, the temperature, the taste of food. I would say number one is the tomato.
Yes.
The tomato in the United States, when I was growing up, it tasted mealy and anemic.
And just,
yeah, and watery. And when I would be in Greece, with the Aegean Sea air wafting over me, eating an organic, warm tomato, it was a completely different fruit. I mean, it was like night and day. It was as if a black and white world had come into Technicolor for my tongue. And so that to me was like the earliest memory of, oh, this is a completely different place, experience, set of values, culture. And so having two parents that are Greek and growing up in the United States, I would say that I feel more aligned. I definitely feel more aligned with Greece in terms of what speaks to my soul. But having this small nuclear unit and growing up then, and then, you know, like spending quite some time in the United States, it was just a very odd feeling. But I would say the tomato is my is like the, you know, proton and neutron of my my experience.
I like that in my mind. It definitely, the proton is the Greek tomato and the neutron is the American tomato.
Oh, well, so this not to get too off topic, but I'm passionate about science and scientific discoveries. I think on some level, my father studied physics, and I feel like I would have totally been a scientist if it weren't for me being so awful at math. I'm like really, really bad at math. And I just kind of assumed, I just thought when I was little, yeah, I'm going to be an astronomer. My father, you know, he did physics at MIT. Like I must have the same mind. And then I literally cannot calculate a tip at a restaurant. I'm seriously, like, it really bums me out, but I still have the passion for science and scientific discoveries. And so I was going to ask if you had heard about how we may have spotted a parallel universe. Did you hear about this?
No, please tell me. And that's perfectly on topic. Literally, the podcast is about what are all of the other things that you're passionate about. So I'm like, brilliant. Tell me more.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, I mean, I can tell you all sorts of other things. Like I sometimes wonder why there's so many circles in the word good when written in the English language in lowercase, but to stay on topic with science.
I was like, parallel universe, and then talk about good, because I also never realized that, and that's fascinating in the phonetic script. That's very strange.
Yeah, it's super, super weird to me. But so in the Antarctic, scientists have been studying cosmic rays using this balloon type machine called the Anita, which is a device designed to detect particles from space. And the trajectory of these rays are usually morphed by magnetic fields, which makes finding their place of origin very difficult. So there's this really great article in newscientist.com, which is a website that I love. But basically, there is one type of particle called a neutrino. Do you know about this? So, okay, if the listeners don't know, basically it doesn't have a charge, therefore it travels through the universe in a straight line. So to locate the origin of a neutrino, you can examine the trajectory using the Anita balloon to see the direction that it hits the ice. But scientists began to discover particles hitting the ice not from above, but from below. So what does that mean? Well, there are three types of neutrinos. Is the muon tau electron. The tau neutrino can sometimes rarely morph into another particle, which is it's called like the tau lepton or something. Basically, before reverting to a tau neutrino, they were thinking perhaps it's possible that the tau neutrino had a trajectory through Earth by morphing upon impact. But that was a stretch because the odds of that happening are something like 1 in a million for that to happen twice.
Right.
So what they think, and what this article was talking about, was that the particles are evidence of cosmic rays going back in time, and that there is an anti-universe going backwards in time towards the Big Bang rather than traveling away from it.
Oh.
And that this might be the first evidence of that occurring.
Of time working the opposite direction then.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Combination Pizza Hut, Taco Bell of time in reverse and going forward.
I just got chills and feel very validated in my perception of time.
Exactly, which was like the first thing you said to me, which is just so interesting.
That is okay. I'm like, 1, I need to link to that article. 2, that's fascinating.
Yes, I'll send it to you.
Yes, please. That is, and it's so interesting when you said that you wanted to be a scientist, and then thinking about what we were talking about with sonic engineering and how you were talking about almost the sonic textures of different places. I thought to myself while you were speaking, I was like, but you are a scientist, you are an engineer, you are all of those things. It's just that it's musical. Like it comes out in a different format.
Oh, well, that makes me feel better.
Like, oh wait, you did those things. You were just telling me about how you were doing them on your iPad. And I feel like sometimes music is like mathematical textures come to life. Like when I actually analyze something I wrote after I wrote it, I can generally see the theory behind it and can see like why structurally sometimes things I write sound better than others, and be like, oh, there actually is like a mathematic scaffolding to this, but it's not on the forefront of my mind when I'm doing it.
Did you study music theory? Like, did you go to school for it, or did you study it?
Yeah, I took, it's funny, I petitioned in high school for AP music theory to count as a language because I was taking French at the time, and our teacher was the only teacher I had who was honestly not very good. Every other teacher I had was excellent. I think that she had just kind of like checked out at that point in her career, and she was just playing the dulcimer for us and having us watch movies, which is lovely. I love the dulcimer, but like the hammered dulcimer does not teach you French.
That is so interesting. I love that cross section of language and music. Also, not to interrupt, but the Ren Fair, the Renaissance Festival, has dulcimer karaoke. Just FYI.
Wait, dulcimer karaoke?
Yes, but I'm way more interested in the story that you're telling me. So you petitioned for
for AP music theory to count for my language credit because I did not want to take AP French with this woman. And so I had been afraid that learning the structure of music would take away the magic of music. But in fact, once I learned it, then I could kind of just toss it into the back of my mind and just like kind of forget about it when I was writing and then use it. And then kind of use it later in the editing process if I wanted to. Now I'm wondering, I was like, how did you start playing music in a, because you had said that your father was a scientist, and what field was your mother in?
My mother studied philosophy. So I created a nerdy joke, which is that my dad was a scientist. My mom is a philosopher. So I'm full of angstrom, but but my mom is a writer. She also, but when I grew up, I guess my initial pull towards music had to do with listening to the song Bolero by Ravel.
Wow.
And I was discussing this recently, but basically I loved that song when I was around 7. It was so passionate and climactic. And so my first instinct was, I want to eat this song. Like, I want to ingest this song. I want to know everything about it. We didn't have a piano, but our next door neighbor did. And I would play with our next door neighbor's cat a lot. So it named Dusty, R.I.P. But I remember that I noticed that they had a piano. So I asked my parents if they could call the neighbor and ask if I could use their piano for a little bit. So they did. They left a key under the mat. I went next door, and my feet couldn't reach the pedals, but I eventually learned how to play that song.
Excellent.
And so that was the beginning of my familiarity with the keyboard. And my parents finally got me this like miniature Casio keyboard, and then they noticed that I was spending a lot of time with it, so then they upgraded me one Christmas to a Yamaha keyboard.
Ooh, moving on up.
And I was really excited about that. And so then I just spent a lot of time. I also eventually got my own cat, so a lot of time spent with a cat and a keyboard. And
that's an excellent combo.
It was my entire universe. And so I have not, I did musical theater in high school. I was part of choirs, but I would love to at some point study music to be able to read notes. I think it would also help for me to articulate to musicians that play with me when they bring my music to life on the stage. I think it would be a more efficient way of getting the information across, as opposed to just like being like, and then it goes meow, 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 because I like default to meow. So I'm like meowing the bass line, meowing the violin part, meowing the, so, but I have so much admiration for people who have studied music, and I would like to do it one day as well.
Well, and sometimes those meows are very freeing. Like, I think that kind of being like studying classical music as a kid and then studying music theory, I sometimes was afraid that I would like mess up the meows, essentially. If I was
mess up the meows. I love that.
If I was explaining something to something, I'm like, what if I do it wrong? Because everything was so precise. And now it's, you know, I've thankfully untrained myself from that. It took a while. It was like the fear of messing up the meows. And that's interesting that then on the opposite side, you're like, maybe there's another way. Maybe.
Yeah, I'd like to tame the meows. I'd like to teach my cat to be on a leash. I mean, not on a leash, but to understand the physics of why a cat lands on its feet every time. I think that thirst for knowledge and being inquisitive is like a really good thing. And I want to know why the cat lands on its feet.
I would love to know that. That's funny that you had a cat by the keyboard. One of my, I call it our forbidden love affair. One of my neighbor's cats has decided that they are now, in fact, my cat. and will sneak in my door at any provocation. And I can hear when she's approaching when I'm playing the piano because she has a little jingle bell on her collar.
She's like, please put me in, coach. I can do percussion.
Exactly.
Did you ever read that article? There was an article, or perhaps it was like a kind of like hidden edition 2020 about cats and how many houses they visit.
Oh my
And
God.
it's something crazy. Like the cat is having an affair with like multiple homes.
All cats are low-key polyamorous.
Yes, apparently. Smart cats.
I do wonder that because I do live in like a condo complex and I do hear other people talking to her. Her name is Begonia. And I do.
Begonia. Oh my
Right?
God. So the word begonia, I just am so touched by hearing that word, because it's a word that immediately makes me think of the warm bosom of my grandmother that I described earlier, who had that funeral. It's a word that she would use a lot. And
Wow.
I have not thought about that word in such a long time, because it doesn't come into my consciousness that frequently. So I'm just like really quite touched to hear it. And I think it's such a great name for a cat.
Oh, I feel like maybe the cat's a mixture of your grandmother and your mischievous great aunt.
Yeah. That's the proton and neutron Pizza Hut Taco Bell of my dead ancestors is this cat. I need to find this. I need to meet this cat, Begonia, on the GoPro.
Oh my gosh, I'll send you a photo of her because she's a beautiful cat. I was wondering, when you were talking about learning how to do stuff on your iPad and things like that, I was like, oh, what other experience do you have with music stuff? And also when you were talking about, this is an offshoot of that, prior to all of the music stuff, like, did you work other jobs or have you always worked in music? Or like, what's your relationship been like to both of those things? I guess learning how to engineer and then jobs outside of music.
I've had a million odd jobs. When I moved to Los Angeles, I initially wanted to move to New York, and then my mother was like, well, that's nice, but how are you going to afford that? New York is very expensive. She said, you have an extended cousin that lives in LA. And I was like, I do. And she said, yes, perhaps that cousin will rent a room to you. So that's what I did. I contacted this cousin. She rented a room to me. And when I moved here, I didn't know anybody. So I had to make ends meet to sustain my art. And so I had worked all sorts of jobs, which I'm grateful for, because with each different thing that I've done, it's informed how I see things. I think it instills me with a sense of gratitude and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
that does, because I think that I've talked to a lot of artists about this, about that there's this myth that if you have a day job or if you're working other jobs, that somehow your art is less pure. And then there's other artists who have said that if anything, sometimes when your art isn't tied to money, that almost kind of frees you in a way to make different kinds of art because it's not predicated on like, will it be profitable?
I think that in a way it's an ecosystem. But to go back to the question of what do you do, and why there's a discomfort with that. It's like I kind of want to be unleashed from those invisible strings that we discussed with the marionetting. Yeah. So I think part of the discomfort also comes from the fact that what do you do is actually, if you follow it with, instead of an ellipses, if you follow it with what do you do right now? Well, that's a very easy question to answer.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do right now? Well, we're on the phone with each other. We're recording this right now. But when I give a non-capitalist answer, it's a lot easier. What do I do today? I can tell you what I do today. What I do today is I think about, before we were on the phone, I think about how there should be justice for Ahmaud Avery, who was gunned down by white supremacists. I signed a petition. What I do today, later on today, is try and crack the code of a song I've been working on. What I do today is, you know, all sorts of things. And what I do at present right now is speak to you. So I think there's no discomfort with that. I know exactly what I've been doing today, but because there is this invisible assumption that what do you do has to be tied to what do you do for money or what do you do for productivity, you will rarely find someone saying, I am standing in my home. Instead, they'll say, I'm a homemaker. Which is completely valid. It's completely valid, but it shows me that there is this pressure to say, what do you do regarding productivity and how it relates to society?
Right.
So I think that at its core, what do you do in this moment is a pretty easy question to answer, but it makes people feel so uncomfortable because of this elephant heel of gravity on your shoulders saying, no, you have to say what it is that you do to make money. And then maybe perhaps that's why people start to feel like, oh God, well, you know, if someone, for example, has multiple jobs, but they're also a musician, that like, you know, to describe what you said earlier, that's what it makes me think of.
Yeah. And like, it related in my mind back to how we were talking about time, where if you think of time as a construct and think of just the immediate moment, because that's all we know that we technically have, because otherwise we're reflecting on either the past or the future. It's like, okay, if you say, what do you do? Like, that's very much something you could answer in the moment. And you could maybe scope out a little bit, like in the future. Like I was like, oh, yeah, I could see that. And it's almost like all those cumulative moments do like kind of snowball into making more of a narrative. But otherwise, it's kind of tied to, well, what are your conceptions of time? What's your value of productivity? And things like that. And some of the things you're describing might eventually lead to something that would be considered an end product. But it sounds like if you're staying in the present moment and seeing time that way, you would be focused on like, well, if you're cracking the code of a song, that song may in fact become a finished song. Or it may be a half-cracked song, or it may turn into a totally different song, or you might get distracted and pick out part of that song and it might go into another song, or, you know, like you don't know the end goal. Yeah.
Absolutely. The first song on my album is called Roseate. Roseate took years to write. I first started that song, I think in like, I don't know if it was like 2012 or 2014. But it took such a long time, and it was born out of a premonition. And then I just was trying to, almost like a Rubik's Cube, clicking through all the various combinations to say, how can I express this closest to the seed of emotion and thought that I have right now? And it took a long time. I'm always mesmerized by people who say like, oh, that song took me 5 minutes. I've certainly had songs that have taken less than a billion years to write. But for me, sometimes cracking that code really takes time.
Yeah. And that I've had similar experiences. I liked what you said about seeking justice, that seeing injustice in the world and doing something about it. I was reading about that murder today, and about the fact that the thing that really got me is that he used to wave at people when he was jogging in his neighborhood. Like, he was known in his neighborhood.
I feel like I'm going to start crying. It's such a awful and sad, but sadly prevalent and frequent topic of the injustice that occurs. I hope that there is movement in that case, and I hope that the justice is served.
Yeah. I feel the same way, and it's a good way to define oneself if you say, what do you do? And it's, well, I spend time engaging in justice for others. I think that is definitely, you know, in some ways when you think about, well, what do you do? It's like, well, what does that look like? And it's like, well, I educate others. I read so that I can educate myself. I sign petitions, I donate to causes, like thinking about all the ways that you can engage in that don't necessarily have to do with what one would define as productivity. I was like, I think that's deeply valuable.
I think that the question, what do you do, is truly so much easier when it becomes more of like, what do you value, or what don't you value, or what makes you laugh, or how do you spend your time, as opposed to what do you do, and then a cliff edge. And we are all expected to do this creepy capitalist dance of saying something that ties to money.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked, I interviewed Sudan Archives. I asked her like what had changed since she's signed to Stone's Throw, and she said that she loves the people there, but that in a way, having your creativity tied to inconsistency like doesn't necessarily help it in any way. Like it doesn't make her more or less inspired. She's just like, oh, I think people have the illusion that when you get a record deal, or when it somehow has this like external validation of capitalism, that somehow that changes your art. And she said, if anything, it's sometimes easier like to not have that attached, and to just engage with what you do value and how you want to spend your time outside of money.
I'm fortunate enough to be signed to a record label right now, Sargent House. Before that, I was on a record label called I'm Sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Sound are lovely people. And when I left I'm Sound, I think it was in some ways perhaps hurtful or difficult for them, but then we are all totally fine now, and I think they understand. Now I'm on Sargent House, and by the way, they're still a great label. But now I'm on Sargent House, and I think one of the things that I like about Sargent House, and this is no slight to I'm Sound, because I just want to make that clear, but
of course.
what I love about Sargent House is that they are the type of label that just wants to foster the multiple ideas that I might have, and they don't necessarily want to hear demos, which I think is interesting. Some labels are like, all right, well, send us the demos, we'll let you know what we're thinking about it, or like we'll guide you in that. And I think what I think is cool about Sargent House is that you can offer them a completed project, and they understand that that is your mission statement.
Right.
And so I value that with them. I think I'm lucky in that regard.
That sounds like a beautiful, like kind of like a trusting relationship, of that they value that you are going to do what you're going to do, and that's why you're there. And so they're like, we trust you to do the thing. Go do the thing.
Go do the thing.
And that's really cool. I was just like, that's a rarity. I do have other friends who have been on multiple labels and have had different publishing deals, where what you said is often the case, where it's like, give us the rough idea. And I can't even imagine in some ways giving my rough ideas to someone other than like my mixer. Why do they want to hear that? Like, what good is that going to do? Because then you're not thinking about the artistry of it. You're thinking about something else while you're creating it.
Yes, and it's looking for the restaurant before finding the food, to use a pizza analogy. It's like, if I deliver the pizza, then they might think, okay, well, let's sell it in an Italian, restaurant, or Domino's, or whatever it is, as opposed to them saying it has to be sold at an Italian restaurant, so deliver us that.
Yeah.
Which then starts to feel like a constraint. And I don't do well when people tell me what to do. so this model works better for me.
That does sound much better, because thinking about music theory wise, when you're talking about that, it's almost like, I remember in class we would have to write certain songs in certain structures just to practice writing in that structure. And occasionally I'd come up with something that I actually liked as a song. But otherwise, it almost sounded like, how Mozart sounds beautiful, but also maybe like lightly sociopathic because it's so perfect.
Sociopathic. I love, see, that is where your intersection of psychology and music have just totally shined amongst other times. Like, I love that you're able to say sociopathic to describe a musical movement. That's okay. So please describe what exactly you mean, because I love this.
It's like, I love Mozart, but it lacks that like little twinge of human empathy, of imperfection, that a lot of times people who have difficulty with like antisocial personality disorder and sociopathy, a lot of what they lack is affective empathy. They only have like cognitive empathy, where you can maybe imagine what someone else would feel like in a situation, but you lack the ability to feel it. And so oftentimes, like sociopathy and antisocial personality disorder, they can be linked with like aberrant behavior, because also your fear response is lessened, as well as your impulsivity is heightened. So it's kind of like your brain doesn't correlate steal the car with something bad happens to you. Like, it's not high stakes in your mind. Like, steal the car is like on par with like steal a paperclip.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, your brain just doesn't ping it as like more dangerous. And since you don't feel affective empathy, if something bad happens and someone is acting upset with you, you don't yourself get upset. You might feel inconvenienced, but you don't. And so it's interesting looking at the brain stuffs behind it. But that's sometimes how I feel listening to Mozart, is that he's writing things that are so perfectly structured that in a way they're inhuman. And so when I'm listening to it, it doesn't necessarily, for me personally, affect me in the emotional way of, say, like Chopin, where some of his runs are kind of messy. Like, you know, things are maybe like slightly out of place and people can interpret them a little differently, and like there's kind of wiggle room in there. Whereas when I'm listening to Mozart, I'm like, this is like if an alien came to Earth and was like, what is music? How do people listen to music?
Right.
It's fascinating.
Well, because the latter is more of a thrill. How is this tangled piece of string going to unravel itself? I feel like I'm living on the edge listening to a composer maybe more like Chopin, where it's like, this is chaos, but I feel like I have the hope there's going to be resolved. So I'm hanging on at the edge of my seat to find out how it resolves, as opposed to everything is completely measured and soon we'll have the end.
Yes.
It's like, it's not as much of a thrill.
It's really not. Bach also did write technically perfect music, but it was perfect and clever in kind of like that fun way. Whereas like Mozart's music does not have that twinge of like, oh, I'm lightheartedly exploring this structure. It's more like, this is the structure. It's flawless.
Right.
Like, ah!
So then it gives almost an uncanny valley feeling.
Yes.
Which you seem to touch upon earlier, that it's almost like the alien, as you mentioned, coming down to earth and saying, this is what a song is, but there's like an unease. Because it's an approximation of what a song is, and it's like, it's all very technical.
It's like
I see what
AI.
you mean.
It's like an AI wrote a song. It's so interesting. And like, I think about people's versions of the songs. Like, I actually was listening this morning to Devendra's version of your song, which was beautiful. And it was cool listening to them, like, not simultaneously. That would be weird. It was back to back. I was just like, wrong word. Like, we're not like Dark Side of the Mooning here. But like, and it was cool. And I was wondering, what was it like having him interpret your song?
Well, first, let me say that it's such an honor when anyone takes the time to interpret one's art through their own emotional channel. That was, it was just so beautiful to hear him apply his own life experience and emotions to a piece that I had written. And sometimes it's really surreal, like going to a parallel universe and doing a slow dance, and then all of a sudden the ocean rises up and does the exact same dance back at you. But it's the ocean, so it's like a different, it's a different substance, it's a different entity, but it's the same, but it's through its own splashing movements that are beautiful but different. So it can be thrilling, and it's an honor. And I was also especially happy that the proceeds are going to the Downtown Women's Center. And I was touched that he did it.
Did you two agree upon that, or was that his idea or your idea?
We agreed upon it. I felt strongly that it would be great to give all the proceeds to a charity, and he is great at fostering community. And so it really spoke to him, and together we agreed that the Downtown Women's Center would be a good organization. And it's a fantastic organization.
That's wonderful. I think that goes back to what you were saying about what do you value and how do you spend your time. I think it's beautiful that you did that. And that is very much in line with my values. And so that made me very happy.
And on a personal level, I used to live downtown. I've actually lived downtown twice. Devendra used to have his art studio downtown, and it's impossible not to live near Skid Row and not be profoundly affected and realize like just the level of what's going on downtown. Yeah. So many men and women need help, but especially women who might be in situations where they're in an unsafe environment. It can be really scary, and I can't imagine what that must be like for homeless women. So I just felt like a natural, like, no-brainer. Of course, this is where this has to go. And perhaps because we both have spent a lot of time downtown, maybe that's how that was informed. I find it odd if anyone were to go downtown and not have that reaction, because it's very apparent what's going on.
It became this incredibly stratified place where it was either you have a $4,000 loft or you're living on the street. Mm-hmm. And watching that transformation was so strange to me, like watching what happened downtown, because I remember that there was an air of it being dangerous as a kid. Like it wasn't an area where my parents and I walked around, and I didn't quite grasp why. And seeing then as an adult, being able to see like how downtown changed, but also seeing the social stratification and seeing how much it was literally people on the streets or people in like beautiful lofts. I was just like, this is wrong. It
is wrong. It is deeply wrong. And when I was there and you would see these various establishments start to pop up, like, I don't know if it's Starbucks or Earth Cafe or whatever, these places would start to be built, they'd be constructed. Mm-hmm. And do you think they would let homeless people use their bathroom?
Of course not.
No, exactly. And so it made me sick, because I'm like, how dare you come in, build this garish thing, charge $20 for a cup of coffee, and you're telling me that then the people who live right outside don't have access to this facility. It's unacceptable.
Yeah. So I very much value that. That's a good way to spend your time, is to be like, how can I help other people?
Yeah. And there's certainly lots of time right now. My heart goes out to all of the essential workers, and
everyone's kind of experiencing my internal sense of time, and I'm like, welcome friends.
Welcome to this like viscous. It is, because time is like a yawn out before us right now, where it like an extended yawn, not to then assign what would be expected adjectives that go with the word yawn, like boring or exhausting, but it's just how long it goes, because we don't know what the end point is. So it has truly made apparent the perception of time, how we digest it, that it is a human construct. Yes. Sometimes if I close my eyes and hold my breath, I really can tap into that sense that time is made up. That we're both going backwards and forwards, possibly, according to this parallel universe theory. So I find it's such an interesting and unique period of time that we're in. Period of time, to use the word time. It's fascinating.
And it completely destroys the notion of what do you do for an end goal, because at this point we have noticed now that those end goals are fabricated.
Exactly.
And so we're like, well, we're just going to do what we value in the moment, and it's going to turn into something. Do we know what yet? No, that's okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you for joining the metaphysical edition of Why Not Both.
Thank you for having me in the suspended time.
This was amazing.
I appreciate it.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.